So yeah, this meeting is now being recorded. Can everybody, other than Kally and Solly, make sure that you mute yourself, and just while they're talking, if you could turn your video off at the same time. That'll just mean that the call isn't too data intense for people who might not have a good Wi-Fi connection. Comrade Solly, was your friend able to connect to the meeting? I just want to double check before we start.
Who?
Yeah, the person that you said was trying to connect, to get into the meeting, into the call.
No, it was not me who spoke about the friend.
It was myself.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, yeah, I will send him the link again.
Okay, and okay, I hope that they were able to get in. If not, yeah, just send a message in the side maybe, and I will be able to try and help out. Okay, I hope that everybody can hear me. Give me 2 seconds to get the system up and running. Okay, you should be able now to see me and hear me. Okay, so welcome everybody. Welcome to the book launch for Kally Forrest's Bonds of Justice, The Struggle for Oukasie. I am Laura Phillips. I'm a postdoc at the history workshop, and the book launch today is being hosted by the history workshop, and we're very pleased to be able to host this launch and to be opening the space up for a discussion about the book and Oukasie and its history between Kally Forrest, the author, and Solly Phetoe, who's also going to on the call and is the discussant for the book today. So Kally is an old friend and longtime associate of the history workshop. She's done significant work on the labor movement, on labor's struggles in South Africa. You know, her previous book, Metal That Will Not Bend, told the history of NUMSA, the National Union of Metal Workers of South Africa. And Kally is now at SWAP, if I'm correct, at Society Work and Politics Institute at Brits. And so in discussion with Kally is Comrade Solly Phetoe, who many of you will know, of course, that he's the Deputy General Secretary of COSATU. And there's lots that I could say by way of introducing Solly. He's a long-standing unionist, a labor organizer. He held these positions and was very active before becoming a Deputy General Secretary of COSATU. But actually of particular relevance to the discussion today is the fact that he comes from the Oukasie area. So we're really looking forward not only to his kind of broader comments and questions about community activism, labor, but also his very local insights as well. And I see there are lots of other people on the call who I think will also be able to contribute to some of the more local parts of the discussion. So Bonds of Justice tells a story about Oukasie. I'm not going to go into any detail about or summary of the book. That's going to be covered by Kally and Solly in their discussion. But I should say that the book is published in the Hidden Voices series through Jacana, and it really slots perfectly into the series efforts at amplifying, giving voices for previously unnoticed or perhaps forgotten experiences in South Africa's recent past. The book was published very recently, pre-corona though, which does feel like a few thousand years ago, but nonetheless very recently actually. And in the short time that it's been out, it's already received a lot of very positive reviews. For example, from Stephen Friedman, also the late Bill Freund wrote a review. So we're really very happy to be hosting this discussion, launching this excellent book. And what I will do now is hand over to Kally and Solly, and the way that we will, the event will unfold is the two of them will be in a question and answer kind of discussion for about half an hour. We will then open to questions from the audience. I'll remind you how to do this when we get to the question and answer session, but you can ask a question either by raising your hand with the Zoom hand raising function. If you don't know how to do that, I'll explain, but you could also just ask a question, type out your question in the chat. So welcome again, and let me hand over to you, Solly and Kally. Thanks.
All right. Thank you very much. Am I audible?
Yeah, go for it.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Laura, for the introduction. Thank you very much, Kally, and thank you very much for the rest of the comrades who are attending to witness the launching of the book, The Struggle for Oukasie. So the struggle for Oukasie during the time of the apartheid, but not only to struggle for the Oukasie community, did not only struggle only for the community, they also struggle for the trade unionism in the factories around Brits in particular, but extended to other areas in the neighboring areas. So Kally, we are going to ask you some few questions, and then as Laura has indicated, we will then allow the audience also to raise some questions to ourselves as we debate, as we launch this very important and interesting book. Now, I'm going to start, Kally. How did you came to write a book about Oukasie, relatively unknown community in the Northwest?
Yeah.
You can tell briefly.
Yeah. Just first to welcome all these people, a lot of these people from the Oukasie community and other people that I know, to this book launch, Bonded Justice, The Struggle for Oukasie. And just to say that the story starts with the last great removal struggle by the Nationalist Party, and in Brits also supported by the Conservative Party. But it doesn't end there. It then moves beyond that period once Oukasie was reprieved to the early 1990s, and then up until 2000, just beyond the democratic elections. I think I should just start by showing you a map so that you have some idea of where Oukasie is. So let me see if I can bring this up. Laura, I can't see share screen at the moment.
Sure, Kally, should I do it?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
It would probably be helpful.
Okay, you keep talking and I'll get it ready and share it.
Okay. It's really a very rough map of Oukasie and its surrounds. But I think I should perhaps just wait for it to come up before I go on with talking about it. But maybe in the meantime, to answer Solly's question, which is, why did I write a book about Oukasie, which is a small community in the Northwest? Well, at the time, okay, well, maybe we should just look at this first. Oh dear, sorry. Can everybody see this map now?
Yes.
If you see in the southwest in the corner, in the southeast in the corner is Pretoria. And you move across here, you will see on the west is Oukasie and Brits. Now they are about 68 to 70 kilometers away from Pretoria. And you'll see that Brits and Oukasie are very close together. In fact, there's literally one tarred road that separates them. And on the one side, you have the old white suburb of Elandsrand in Brits. And the other side, you have what was then an informal settlement and is now a township. Then if you move up north, you see the township of Letlabile. And this is about 22 k's away from Oukasie and Brits. And it was a site where the nationalist government was attempting to move the residents of Oukasie to what was then a newly built township. And then you see to the north and the east of these three places, Brits, Oukasie, and Letlabile, is what was then the homeland of Botswana. And this, of course, this area played a significant part in the history of Oukasie. Okay, I think we can go back to Zoom.
Okay.
Yeah, to continue with, you know, at that time I was in the trade union movement, what was known then really as the emerging trade union movement. And it was a time when the unions spoke to each other a lot about what was happening. There would be discussion about strategy and tactics, and if there were any new struggles that were happening, there would be discussion about how solidarity could be lent and so on. And in that kind of environment, I came across a struggle that was being waged in Brits at the BNS factory. And the BNS factory was owned by the Back family, and it employed about 900 workers. Most of these workers were women, and many of them came from Botswana, traveling maybe 2 or 3 hours a day to get to work. And some of them came from the local community of Oukasie, where they literally had to have a very short walk to get to their workplace. And most of these workers were women who were earning about 196 Rand a month at the time, and were under very abusive conditions. These workers went on strike, and 900 of them were dismissed. They were basically trying to get the employers to recognize the union. They were dismissed, and then the employers opened it up to selective re-employment. But about 300 of these people decided that they were not going to go back to work, that they were going to continue struggling for recognition, and that they were, I suppose it was about a core of 300 people, decided to go on what turned out to be a trial of strength, which lasted about a year.
Okay.
But what was remarkable for me was that this strike and the organizing of this factory had not come from the emerging unions. In fact, it had come through 2 young men who lived in the Oukasie community and who had been dismissed from their own factory. And these young men were Peter Dankies and David Modimeng. And they assisted this factory to get organized. And once the dismissals had happened, they then contacted unions that were emerging in the Pretoria area to get assistance from them. Much later, I was asked by NUMSA, the National Union of Metal Workers of South Africa, to write their history. And of course, I came across this community again, and I also came across a lot of the struggles that happened in the Brits industrial area at that time. And it really provoked me to think about what had happened to this community, what had happened since it had been reprieved. And so I decided to go back there and do research and find out what had happened really up to the year 2000. Okay, thanks.
All right. Thank you very much. I think in the follow-up questions, in terms of what you are explaining to us, including to the audience, what do you think the book is chiefly about, or what do you think the book would be able to people to understand the role that Oukasie played in the struggle?
Yeah, ostensibly the book is about historical trajectory of Oukasie during a very turbulent period in South African history, and a period where there was a great deal of change happening. As I said, it's a period between the 1980s and the year 2000. But actually what I think the book is about the power of organization and the power of good leadership. These 2 young men that I mentioned formerly were from an organization called the Young Christian Workers. This was a strong pro-poor and I would say socialist-inflected organization aiming to bring in the youth. But as I said, these two young people were from this organization, and they were guided by the slogan, See, Judge, Act. And what that in essence meant was that they had to go out into their communities, find out what was happening, see what the priority problems were, and then come back and judge or assess what needed to be done. What kind of change could happen and what kind of role could they play in that change. And in that process, they would decide how they could go out as a small group. There were about 7 or 8 of them in this chapter in Oukasie, and would then go out and act on that knowledge. The YCW was an international organization, and there were a number of branches across South Africa. But as I said, there was this one chapter that was in Oukasie of a small group of people. So in essence, what it would mean, for example, is that they might decide that a factory in Oukasie or in Brits needed to be organized, and they would decide that they would go and they would try and make contact with 2 or 3 workers, and then they would come back in a week's time, in a month's time, whatever they decided, and report on what had happened, whether they'd failed, whether they succeeded, if they had succeeded, why, and what sort of action should they take from there on. So in essence, what I'm describing is a kind of direct participatory democracy, and a very strong level of accountability. So these young people would be accountable to their own organization, the YCW, through report backs and discussion, but they were also embedded in the community itself. And so they would be accountable to that community as part of that community, and would see themselves as part of the working class in that community.
Okay.
In essence, this was a political tradition that emerged as an alternative to the UDF, that was the United Democratic Front, and the SSEP underground then, SSEP and ANC tradition. And this is well illustrated by Moses Kluter saying, Moses, who's actually in the audience here today, was then the YCW South Africa General Secretary. And when when the YCW was considering affiliating to the UDF, this is what he said, and he said it laughingly, but he said, at the time, UDF was viewed as a bunch of lazy people who read the Freedom Charter and would come and shout. And in essence, the YCW didn't affiliate it to the UDF on the basis that it was an unfocused organization prone to jargon, populist in orientation, relying on hyped mass mobilization. So really, the YCW did not assume that leadership just naturally emerged. It believed that it was nurtured, that it was developed, and it was through experience of leadership that the power of your leadership was tested. Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Kally. You spoke about the young Christian workers. Are you able to tell the audience or to tell us about the role of the young Christian workers they played in making sure that workers around Brits are unionized, including the role that the Oukasie people played in making sure that they are able to fight against the incorporation of Oukasie and other areas into Putatswana?
Yeah, I think just to say, in about 1985, the Nationalist Party's attempt to remove Oukasie were substantially intensified. They had tried to remove Oukasie on various occasions in the past, but this was really their final strong push to do that. And in that attempt, the YCW, as soon as it became aware of this final push, called a meeting of the community to talk about this removal, and about 800 people attended this meeting and decided to resist the removal and launch what was known as the Brits Action Committee. And the executive of this Brits Action Committee were mainly the leadership of the YCW and leadership of the trade unions. And what I should say is, of course, trade union members were living in Oukasie. And I should explain at that time, there was a substantial Brits industrial area, and it was right on the border of Botswana. And there was an attempt by the nationalist government to legitimize Botswana, or legitimize the homelands, by creating industrial areas where people from those homelands would be employed, and also to say, look, these homelands are viable and they've got industrial areas and there's manufacturing going on here and so on. But of course, these areas, the Brits area, very rapidly developed, partly because the nationalist government offered huge incentives for factories, mines, manufacturing, whatever, to open factories on these borders. Basically, they paid they gave a subsidy which paid the wages of these workers. And so this area, this Brits industrial area, by about 1983 lay ripe for union organization. And there were some really major battles that were fought between then and about 1986, where some powerful victories were won by the trade unions, particularly the unions in the auto union, in the auto sector. Mau and Now, who later joined together to become NUMSA. And so it was no accident that when the BAC executive was elected, that these people from leadership positions in the union were elected onto the committee together with the YCW people. But I think what was very significant about this kind of executive is that they really understood the power of solidarity and the power of unity. They knew that if there was any kind of divisions in the community, or like if there were any divisions in the factory, that you'd lost the battle. And they were very successful at keeping people together, at reporting back, at getting mandates, of giving news, of meeting regularly. And I'm not saying that there weren't some people who decided to move to Letlabile. Indeed, I think in about the first 6 months, about 4,000 people did move, and ultimately about 7,000 people moved to Letlabile in a community of about 16,000 people. But basically, there was a core of people who were absolutely determined to resist this removal. And they spawned a number of other organizations themselves within the community. There were youth organizations, there were parents, teachers committees, there were women's groups and so on. But what was interesting about those groups is they didn't just talk about how they were going to resist removal. They looked beyond that to realize that if they should win this struggle, they need to develop Oukasie, and they started to think about how Oukasie should be developed. The other thing that I just wanted to say, in your question about why was the BAC so successful in repulsing this removal, is that this executive was a very confident and outward-looking executive. It went out and found organizations that could assist it. And it wasn't afraid to bring in outsiders to help them in their struggle. And in particular, I'm thinking of TRAC, the Transvaal Rural Action Committee that they made connections with. This was a subcommittee of the Black Sash. And the TRAC had been operating across the Transvaal, assisting various communities who were under threat of removal. So they were experienced, but they also offered resources. And in particular, the BAC decided to employ a legal strategy, and TRAC was able to provide them with experienced lawyers in the area of land and removals. So there were a number of successful cases that were taken up. And I think I should just illustrate this by one particular legal action that was taken in 1988. In 1988, the nationalist government, who were really fed up with this very stubborn community that refused to be moved and who stayed solid in the face of this threat, decided to disestablish, if you can imagine this strange word, disestablish Oukasie. And that meant declaring it as a temporary emergency camp, where obviously people could no longer reside and their houses would be mown down and they had to move off. So 4 residents in the community decided to sue the Transvaal administrator and to argue that this was in fact a very established community. And it's a very surprising judgment, because it was given by a very conservative judge, Van Dijkhorst. He ruled that, yes, in fact, these people were residents. They belonged to this community, and they had lived there for many years, and they simply couldn't be declared as non-existent. I mean, that night there was, of course, a huge celebration in Oukasie, because this was a significant victory. But across the road in White Brits, something very different was happening. Sorry, let me just get this. Something very different was happening. Basically, in 1988, the same period, there were the white national elections occurring. And in these elections, the National Party MP for Brits lost his seat, and he lost his seat to the further right in the Nationalist Conservative Party. And then about 6 months later, in Brits itself, the nationalist local municipality, the Nationalist Council, also lost its seats, and it became a Conservative council. So clearly there was still a battle to be fought. Yeah, I think I should stop there.
All right. Yes, thank you very much, Kally. I think I've got many questions, but I'm going to limit my questions now so that we allow the audience to also to raise some few questions or comments. I've got the last 2 questions. I'm going to ask you those questions once and you respond. The next question that I'm going to ask to you is what is specific about Oukasie that makes their story stands out? That's the question I want to respond, because Oukasie fits into the large national apartheid story. But we would want you to tell us about what's specific about Oukasie that makes their story to stand out. The second question, does the legacy of this struggle still survive in Oukasie and in the way that this municipality of Madibeng operates? Do you think that the struggle of the Oukasie is surviving in the manner that this municipality called Madibeng today is operating? There are many questions that I would want to ask, but as I said, I want you to respond briefly, quickly, because of time, so that we're able to allow the audience to raise some few questions that they have or comment. Kally?
I'll try and be brief, but it is quite complex. You're asking me whether Oukasie was part of a national strategy at the time, or whether it was something specific about Oukasie's struggles. And of course, it was part of the national strategy. The nationalists by that time had decided that their carrot and stick, their reform policies, were simply not working, that there was a popular revolt that was sweeping the whole country and all the townships in the country. And of course, Oukasie wasn't separate from that. It was very much part of that feverish revolt. And of course, in 1986, a national state of emergency was declared, and that impacted on all townships, including Oukasie, in that period. But I do think there was something particular about Oukasie, and that was partly because it had been such a stubborn thorn in the side of the nationalists, that there was something quite personal about the way it treated the community. And the first thing that we see, and this is before the national state of emergency was declared, in about 1990, sorry, in about, let's say, yeah, it was about 1985, they started targeting the leadership of the back. And the way they targeted them was to basically petrol bomb their houses late at night. And a number of houses were petrol bombed in this way. And really the worst attack culminated in 1986 when the house of David Modimeng was bombed and his wife was killed in the attack. Almost immediately, a state of emergency was declared, and Oukasie, like other people across the country, people were either detained, the leadership, or they went into hiding. And even in hiding, the Oukasie leadership tried to keep in contact, tried to strategize what they could do in the situation and so on. But really in about 1988, we find that another strategy is emerging to try and break and smash organization in Oukasie. And this was when people were released from detention at the end of the first state of emergency, when the leadership of the back were released. It was clear that some of these people had been turned in detention. And there was one particular character known as Leonard Brown, who gathered around him a number of young people who were later to become known as the Comrades. And through their efforts, decided to get rid of the old back leadership. They managed to push them off the executive and then moved into the community and started with considerable intimidatory tactics, where a lot of violence, a lot of fights, and indeed murders happened in the community. And I think I should explain that Oukasie was, before this, a very friendly, open community. People knew each other well. They were good neighbors. They'd grown up together. They went to school together. They hung their washing up together. And there was certainly not an atmosphere of tension and aggression. But all that completely changed in this period around 1988, where people felt substantially intimidated, especially when one of the main leaders of the back, Marshall Bass, was literally hauled out of his house and hacked to death. And so what we find is that organization fractures and people are too afraid to leave their houses at night. They're afraid to attend meetings. They simply go to work and very rapidly come back to their houses. And there's just the feeling that they're being delivered up to a kind of reign of terror, which they have very little control of. And it is certainly in this period that the church played a very important role in just keeping up people's spirits up. But this is not unique to Oukasie. Indeed, one of the Nationalist Party's lasting legacies was that they managed to smash civic organization in that period. And for most communities, it never really resurrected itself, even post-apartheid. But of course, times were changing, and I do think Oukasie was rather different in this respect. Times were changing, and of course, as most people will know here, that in 1990, Mandela was released, and liberation organizations were unbanned, the ANC, the SSCP, and so on. And of course, this had an impact on Oukasie. So in 1991, in January 1991, we find that the Transvaal administrator decided, announced that he would reprieve Oukasie and that Oukasie would be developed. Now, what was interesting about the Oukasie leadership, that it was particularly deep and particularly in sort of well connected, and so that it immediately launched the OCA, and that was the Oukasie Civic Association. And in that civic association, there was discussion mainly about, okay, Oukasie is going to be developed. We want to be in control of this development, and we want to be an integral part of this development. And this, in its turn, spawned another organization called the ODT, the Oukasie Development Trust. And this development trust, if you like, was the wing of the community which was going to deliver the goods and services. And then through the OCA, there would be direct communication with the community so they could input into these development initiatives. At the head of the ODT was a remarkable figure called Levi Mamabolo. And nearly everybody that I interviewed, both on the right and the left in Oukasie, basically saw him as a Mandela type figure, a wise figure. He was actually head shop steward at the Robert Bosch factory, that he was wise, that he was able to ensure that factional ideological struggles didn't break out in the process of the development. He was approachable, he was highly accountable, and it is much credit to him that this development initiative really took off. What was remarkable about the ODT is that they were very open to any outsiders who were willing to help in this development initiative. So they even, for example, brought in a nationalist councillor who wanted to support the development of Oukasie and who offered to audit their books. And indeed, they were bringing in literally millions of rands, and there was never even a sniff of corruption at that time. But really, just to explain what happened is the ODT immediately set up a relationship with the Independent Development Trust, which is a quasi-government development trust. It also invited in the Urban Foundation, which was a private sector housing organization trying to deliver housing in the townships, and who had a number of very well-honed technical experts in housing. So what you have is a very interesting combination of a highly politicized community working with and making people who were experts and expert technicians working within a very accountable environment. And this had really quite surprising outcomes. I mean, I could talk more about the development, but as Solly says, I should try and hurry this up. But suffice it to say that by 1994, every house in Oukasie had a water connection, had an outside flush toilet. There were community facilities. A big community hall had been built. There were sports fields. Roads had been laid. On a smaller scale, there were public phones that were put in place. There were mailboxes. A library had been built and had been well stocked and staffed and was already in use. And more than that, what the ODT has done was managed to purchase further land to the north of Oukasie. And this it did through the IDT, who basically, they were able to draw down subsidies from the IDT for site and service plots. And each of these site and service plots would then be put in the name of a particular family with a view to them getting the title deeds. And indeed, by 1995, 1,665 of these sites had already been transferred to families. So, I mean, this was absolutely unique. I know of no other community in South Africa at that time where this level of development was achieved. Yeah, it was really mainly achieved before 1994, mainly achieved before the democratic elections.
Okay, thank you very much, Kally. I see Laura, she's standing up there because of time. We're running out of time. I think for this remaining few minutes, we're going to allow the audience to say something, comments or questions. If the two of us will be able to try and answer some of the questions and comments, but the book has got a lot of history that we can learn, even those who were not part of the struggle of Oukasie or the struggle against the apartheid regime in that time. They will be able to read and learn and understand what role that Oukasie, in particular the young Christian workers, the role they play in unionizing the Brits industry and protecting, as you said, Laura, the comrade in Oukasie did not only work for Oukasie only, they also work with other people outside in making sure that they defend the rights of the community, like in Braklachte, in Moutse, including the place called Hartbeesfontein, where it was a forced removal of Machakaning next to Brits. Some of the people in Machakan refused to be moved or evicted to Hartbeesfontein because of the help of the comrade in Oukasie. Can we now allow those few minutes for the comment or questions? Laura, you will help me because I'm not able to see who raised hands from my computer here.
Sure. So great. Thank you very much to both of you, Solly and Kally. A reminder, so the way to ask questions, there are two ways to ask questions. Either raise your hand, and you'll find the raise hand icon. If you click on participants at the bottom of your screen, a right-hand column will come up, and there should be a couple different buttons at the bottom of that right-hand column. One of them is raise your hand, and we can recognize you once you've done that. Or if you don't want to speak, or you can't figure out how to raise your hand, then you can just type out your question in the chat, and then we'll ask it on your behalf. So while people are figuring out the technology, let me just read Karen Pampalis's comment, which is very useful. Logistics. For those who want to buy a copy of the book, it's available in various ways, she says. You can buy it online from Loot, which is www.loot.co.za, or buy as a Kindle book from Amazon, I'm sure Amazon.com, and she says another way you can buy in Johannesburg from Karen herself, and you can contact her at PAMPS, that's PAMPS, @global.co.za. So for anyone who wants to buy the book, that's how you can do it.
Okay.
Yeah. So I don't see any hands. If anyone would like to speak and can't raise their hand or figure out how to ask a question in the chat, just unmute yourself and step in. But I do, sorry, actually here comes a question. Let me ask this directly to you, Kally, from Jill Murray, who's sent her a question in the chat, which is, how has Oukasie fared post-1994? I'm sure that's, we could spend hours talking about that, but maybe you could give us a brief overview of the trajectory of Oukasie post-94. And whilst Kally's talking, I'm looking.
I'll answer this, but I think, Solly, you're also very welcome to chip in. The book does actually go on to talk about the post-1994 period. And of course, what happened is transitional local councils were set up across South Africa. And these local councils were supposed to set up, were mandated to set up full wall-to-wall municipal councils, because of course, previously the councils only covered the white areas. Now they were to be extended, and by 2000 were to be launched as full municipality covering all the citizens of South Africa. And of course, leaving Mamabolo, not of course, but very naturally, became the Brits Transitional Council mayor. And his council were actually fairly successful in delivering services in about the next 3 years. But of course, his services weren't going into Oukasie anymore. They had to go into the extended Brits Council. And this meant really it was a very rural area, a farming area. And Mamabolo's council was able to, in this period, deliver water connections and electricity connections to really a great many villages in that municipality. But by 1990, I think in 1997, actually, Mamabolo died, and he was replaced by David Modiemeng as mayor. But Modiemeng was then quickly maneuvered out by these sort of young, hungry ANC councillors who, using a technicality, pushed him out, and he went back into NUMSA, his union. And I think really from that period, you see a kind of a decline in the delivery of services in that area. It was still called the Brits Council, but by 2000 it became the Madibeng municipality. And I mean, I think it's very tempting to say, oh, it's just because of corruption and that's why there was this decline and fell apart. But actually there were a whole lot of, really a whole lot of quite complex issues that made it very difficult to implement the services that people were hungry to get. And there really were a whole number of obstacles to this. So I don't think I can go into that now because it'll take too long, and perhaps other people also want to comment.
Comrade Solly, do you want to add anything to that?
No, except to say that Kally says the Comrade David was removed by young people from the ANC. In fact, it was a faction of the ANC who wanted to use the ANC to eat. That's why today, after the death of Comrade Leaf Mamabula, we never had a mayor who would match Comrade Leaf Mamabula. And the reason why, at that time, I remember Comrade Hlokoza, I was leading the COSATU local of Brits, where we fought for David Modimeng, the late David Modimeng, to become the mayor of Brits because of the history that he had about Brits and the struggle of the workers and the working class. On that note, we can allow any comment, Laura?
Great, yeah, interesting. Okay, so I see a comment and a question from Moses Kluti and also a hand from David Dickinson. So let's take Moses's first. And Moses has volunteered Jean-Marie to comment. So he's asked, can you comment, you made a seminal contribution to the struggles in Oukasie, and he also says, I want to salute David, Hlokoza, Malispa, Peter, Solly, who all made great contributions. But let me just add his question then, and then we can open up. And then all the BS and BNS workers who took their ground for more than a year and were victorious in their struggle and contributed greatly to that victory. And clarifies contributed to unionization in the whole area. So not a specific question, but maybe we can move over to Jean-Marie and then we'll take David Dickinson's question. If you're willing to talk. Sorry, there we go. Yeah.
Okay. No, I think that Mrs. Forrest did it very well about the history of Oukasie. I mean, I have got the book, I read it through, and it's a very impressive work she did. I was just thinking she well understood YCW very well, and she could be a very good chaplain to new YCW groups in Oukasie. Anyway, no, what I think personally, which is very important, is the word of accountability that is appearing in the conclusion of the book somewhere. I think Cello spoke about that. When the people, the YCW militant leaders started doing something, they did it by themselves and in the open. There was nothing in the underground, nothing hidden. That was taking their own responsibility about what they were going to do. And they were not forced to do it. And they started from they were with the people around themselves, and at the level they were able to do it. And that is the way they built up the movement in Oukasie, and they built up the trade union. When they started building the trade union in Firestone, it was because they were YCW people in Firestone, and they started speaking to the people around themselves to develop the movement in the factory and so on. So that was a very contribution of the YCW, and I think it's a difficulty also of the tension with other type of organizations. It's a grassroots level, a grassroots organization. And sometimes it is difficult when it comes to political issues. That was a point. And it was a worker consciousness. There were a workers' consciousness was extremely important in Oukasie, particularly in the time of apartheid, which was driven by a racist type of risk, let us say. And that was that is what my comment. That's enough, I suppose.
Thank you.
Great, thanks. Before we move to David's question, do you want to add on to that either Solly or Kally?
No, not from my side. I'm happy with the comment.
Great, very interesting. Okay, David, can you unmute yourself and ask your question, David Dickinson?
Yeah. Thanks, Kally. Thanks very much for the book. I haven't read it yet. I'm really looking forward to it. In reading about histories of townships in South Africa and apartheid, one of the things that struck me is this attempt by white administrators to make the township self-sustainable financially, and being pushed by the nationalist government, obviously, and group areas and so on. And obviously, it was in most municipalities that was attempting the impossible. But nevertheless, it created huge pressures, and I think there's continuities with the service delivery issues of today. But I just wondered if you'd had anything on that. To what extent did that push for financial self-sustainability within the township or the townships? Because obviously the government, the municipality is playing with the two townships here, trying to disestablish, as you say. Did that have what impact did that have on people, on mobilization? And then just a particular interest within that. I mean, one of the major sources of revenue, often the biggest source of revenue, was the sorghum beer trade, which the municipalities had a legal monopoly on. And just wondering whether that played a fact, because the idea of a monopoly over the beer, alcohol, raises all sorts of interesting dimensions. Anyway, was there anything that you came across there or anything to contribute? And perhaps it's in the book anyway. Thanks.
I mean, at the time, it was the black local authorities who operated in the township. They were the municipality of the township. And of course, they were just viewed as stooges. They had absolutely no money. They couldn't provide any kind of services. And in fact, at the beginning, you might have seen that picture with the two kids looking at a house that's been burnt down. And that was one of the councillors' houses from the black local authority that had been burnt down in the community. But David, I think the major source of revenue, and it didn't go into the black communities, but in the apartheid period, was first of all taxation from the industrial areas of Brits. And secondly, that white Brits were paying for services. And so Brits Council was actually quite wealthy. But of course, it was wealthy because it never provided any services into the black townships or into the informal settlement. And this, of course, became a huge problem later once we have the ANC Council. Basically, first of all, a whole lot of industry moves away from that area because they're no longer getting the subsidies from the nationalist government. So we find a number of automobile and other factories moving to areas where the infrastructure is more accessible and where it's much cheaper to run their factories. That, of course, leaves a whole lot of unemployment behind them in Oukasie. And of course, there's no longer a strong tax base. In the townships, as you mentioned, there was really a boycott of any kind of services. This happened quite late in Oukasie because it was very focused on the removal. But the boycott of paying rents and paying anything to the black local authorities did kick in. And it was very difficult later to persuade people to pay any kind of rent, especially as they weren't receiving any services. I don't in my interviews, I didn't come across anybody talking about revenue from the beer trade. It just seemed like the Black local authorities were pretty non-functional.
Okay, thanks, Kally. I'll look forward to talking more about that. Great.
Great, thanks very much. Okay, we're coming towards the end of our slot. So any last questions, please do raise your hand or put them in the chat. I see there's another comment here from Moses. Those in universities should encourage students to tell the forgotten histories, and in fact that of the movements like the YCW, whose influence can be found all over South Africa. I think the history of the emerging trade union movement, and interestingly that of COSAS, can be told again. There's also here a comment which I also comes as part of Bevel's general congratulations, I think, to Kally. He says, today I still apply the methodology in our housing struggles here in Cape Town. We in Reclaim the City still challenge the economic, I assume the economic and politics. One question from me, if there are no other questions, and then Kally, I'll hand over to you if you want to just say any last final words. And my question is about how people remember Oukasie, the people that you are interviewing. To what degree is this kind of quite proud history of resistance that you've spoken about and you tell in your story very much part of kind of contemporary understanding of a generation above the kind of younger residents in Oukasie today, or is this forgotten mostly among people of the region?
Yeah, I'd like you, Solly, also to comment on this, because you is kind of a generation younger than this leadership that I'm describing. But no, there seems to be quite a profound schism between that old leadership and young people of today. I mean, when I launched the book on Oukasie, one of the very active people was talking to me and saying, young people don't want to listen, they're not interested in their history, they just think that old people are droning on about a period, which, yeah, lots of things happened, but it's not really significant to us anymore. We're dealing with drug abuse in the community, you're dealing with unemployment, you're dealing with a council that doesn't deliver. You know, it is very difficult for the generations to speak to each other. I got that sense.
Do you want to add in there, Solly, before we close off?
Yeah, no. I think the young people now in Oukasie, as Kally is indicating, will require that this history of the young Christian workers must get into their mind. And the only way to do that is a continuation of a sort of workshop or a lecture about Oukasie. Because if you go to Oukasie today, you would not see young people being active in the struggle of developmental areas in where they stay. You would not see young workers or young people interested in joining the union. So we would have to find a way in this book, comrade, that we're able to send a clear message that young people should play a central role in advancing the agenda of the working class and the poor people in this country. In Oukasie in particular, as Kally was saying, if you go to Oukasie today, you wouldn't see that that area. There were many credible leaders that emerged from Oukasie, people like Comrade Hlokoza, Peter Tanji, the late Comrade David, the late Leif Mamabolo, Silo Ramakoye, and many people who played a central role in the unbanning of the African National Congress today. So I think we would have to find a way that the young people in Oukasie, not only in Oukasie, but the young people in South Africa today, they speak about themselves, and I don't blame them. There are those who are saying, it was your time to eat, this is my time. Others are saying, I did not struggle to be poor when the rest of the community and the working class continue to be poor. You know, the last question that we raised about the Madibeng, the way the Madibeng Council is operating. You can visit today Madibeng, you would cry if you were part of that generation of Comrade Leaf Mamavulo and the rest of the other comrades. You will cry tears in terms of what is happening today.
Thanks very much for that. On that note, which unfortunately is quite a sad note, let's just finally, lots of congratulations coming into Kally in the chats. I won't read them all, but thanks to everyone who's posted there. And let me hand over to Kally just to say the final word.
Yeah, I mean, I think just one of the things I wanted to say is that this narrative really illustrates how little people have voice nowadays. If people talk about the poor, the unemployed, the youth, and so on, they talk on their behalf. There's very little voice coming through from these people about what are their priorities, if there are difficulties in resources, how could those resources be allocated, and so on. And for me, the YCW stands and the union stand out as a great example of ensuring that those voices come through and that in response you can make appropriate development or appropriately deal with their issues. Yeah, just finally, if I could, I'd just like to say some thanks to people for enabling this book to actually happen. And the first person that I'd like to thank is the late Professor Phil Bonner. He was at the time the head of the Saatchi chair at the University of the Witwatersrand. And he was running a program called Local Histories, Present Realities. And he was very supportive of me going back into Oukasie and taking this history forward. And he also, when I had done the research and I'd written up the research, he was very encouraging in getting me to write this book. And further, I'd like to thank the National Institute for Humanities and Social Sciences, who have a project called Hidden Voices. And this book is part of that Hidden Voices series. And they provided basically the essential resources to publish this book and to publish it through a wonderful South African publishing company called Jacana Books, Jacana Media. Yeah, it would not have happened without them. I think a number of people would have seen those photographs at the beginning of this launch. And those photographs in the main were taken by Jill de Vlieg. She was a Black Sash member, and she was also part of the Afropix collective. And she just moved around the Transvaal on her own in that time, taking pictures of people who normally you would not have anything to do with, or certainly not see in the general course of life. And she allowed me to use a number of her photographs in the book, for which I'm very grateful. And yes, finally, I'd like to thank the History Workshop for allowing me to launch this book in this virtual launch today. And also, thank you very much for, further than that, supporting me to launch the book in Oukasie in March or April this year, which was very important to me and I hope was important to the people of Oukasie. And yeah, thank you everybody for coming today. Many of you who know this history better than I do, and for wrenching yourself away from the US elections and for seeing what true democracy looks like.
Yeah.
I think there's just a final image that, Laura, if I can, I'd like to put up, and that is, it's a picture of Mandela, who went back into Oukasie in 1995 to take part in the YCW 9th World Council meeting. And this is an image, I don't know whether I can get it. Will you try for me, Laura? It's together with the map.
Oh, sure. Okay, I'll try to get it up.
This is an image of Mandela dancing on the field in front of the Oukasie Community Centre. And it was really a celebration of the reprieve of Oukasie and a celebration of its development, because of course, if this community had not struggled so hard to keep their community alive, we certainly wouldn't have seen this kind of development that still exists today. And so it was really a moment of supreme celebration. And I'd just like to leave you with this, this image.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Kally. Thanks very much also to Solly for being the discussant and everybody who came. There have been a number of other comments in the chat, so have a look at them. I see there's some exchange between Moses and some others. And thanks for a very exciting launch. And remember to buy the book. The details are up in the chat from Karen, available on Loot, Amazon, or directly from Karen herself. Congratulations, Kally, and thanks very much, everybody. I'm going to close the call now. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Bye.
Bye. Thank you, Kally.
Bye.
Thank you, Tlakoza.
Bye, Jamari.
Well, yeah, because I saw also Chris and Chicha is somewhere.
Yeah, it's me, yes. Hey, bye-bye.
Clement, okay.